essentially us trying to unify our products across care settings, because we have expanded. We're now working across community, across mental health, pharmacies, acutes. We're not kind of solely working in GP anymore. And because we're now working across lots of care settings, we had kind of lots of different versions of our product, which meant that every time we went to release something new, we're having to do it multiple times. It kind of opened up more opportunities for bugs, etc. So we really spent 2024 trying to unify that in the back end of our product, so that moving forward, we can release stuff much faster. It hopefully works a little bit quicker. But also, like, one of our kind of big visions, which I'll touch on in more detail, is creating this kind of one communication platform, NHS wide, so that anybody involved in a patient's care can communicate and collaborate in one place. And doing that convergence of our product on the back end is really kind of laying the groundwork for us to be able to do that. But the reason I touch on that is because we've now completed a lot of that work and a lot of that groundwork, which means we can get back to releasing new features, which is why we now have our 2025 product roadmap for general practice, which is what I wanted to run through today, and kind of show you what you can expect to see from us over the next year and beyond. We do also have a public-facing roadmap, which I'll kind of share. I'll share the slides afterwards, and there's a link in there. I would really recommend going to have a look at that. It gives you kind of the things I'm going to talk about today, but in a timeline, so you can see when we expect to release it. And it also goes through stuff in kind of a lot more detail than I'll have time to go through today. But yeah, just to start off with, some of the stuff we've released recently over the past month or so is direct links. So you might have seen this on your managed organization page when you're using AccuRx. This essentially allows patients to navigate to a specific request directly from your website. So rather than having to go to the online form, if you're using AccuRx for your online consultation tool, rather than the patient having to go to the online form and then navigate to admin and then find the repeat prescription request, actually you can just copy that link directly onto your website and they can navigate directly to there. It also helps if maybe if you have a patient that's struggling to kind of find the right page or get to the right place, you can just send that link directly in a text or in an email, for example, to kind of help guide them. We're also in the piloting stage of configurable appointment amendment rules, which just really rolls off the tongue, which is going to allow users to have much more configurability over what patients can do with that a cancellation link within the appointment reminder message. So right now, I'm sure you're very aware that they can go in, click that cancellation link, cancel their appointment, and it will remove from your appointment book. Actually, we want to give you more configurability about kind of time frames, so maybe setting a deadline for when they can cancel up to, allowing patients to potentially request to reschedule their appointment through that link. So essentially empowering practices to do more with it. As I said, it's in piloting stage, so we've got a few practices that are trying it out. We'll take a lot of their feedback and then iterate where we need to before kind of rolling it out further, hopefully over the next month or so. So should be seeing that one in all practices relatively soon. A couple other things that have now been released. So again, if you're using AccuRx for kind of your online consultation tool, you can now sort your messages and kind of requests in your inbox or in your folders in chronological order. So newest to oldest or oldest to newest. It obviously won't affect any of your urgent messages. They'll stay flagged at the very top, but everything else can now be sorted nicely in order. And then also multiple attachments has recently been launched. So previously you were able to attach one thing per message. You can now attach up to 5 things, up to 3 megabytes each when you're creating a message in the compose screen. So hopefully reducing the number of kind of like duplicate messages you were sending and being able to just nicely tie it into one message when communicating with a patient. So those are just some of the things that have been released over kind of the past month or so. But to dive into, I guess, the main part of the presentation, which is the roadmap for 2025. Before I go into more of the details, just to give, I guess, a bit of a sneak peek preview at some of the highlights. First of it is that we are hoping to have, or we are looking to build smarter care navigation into our online consultation tool, which we call Patient Triage. So that will essentially be a smarter way to design the patient request journey, ensuring that patients have appropriate options about where to seek care, and that GPs are then equipped with the information they need to make effective triaging decisions. So I'll go into these in more detail and kind of dive into what we mean by smart care navigation in more detail as well. But the second one then being the ability to customize the inbox. So a little bit like that sorting feature I just mentioned, being able to kind of add labels or tags to your requests, being able to filter and sort based on those tags and labels, being able to create your own teams and own folders, really setting up your inbox based on how your practice works and giving you much more kind of autonomy and customization over that. The ability to connect and work with other sites around a patient's care. So we're doing more to enable kind of hub working, cross-organisational booking, better communication with other care settings for things like specialist advice seeking, etc. And then also doing more with our NHS app integration. So you might be aware of our individual messaging pilot, which is live, but really we're trying to send more of our message volumes through the NHS app, not only to, I guess, partner with their vision of it becoming this digital front door, but also because it helps with fragment and kind of reducing the costs that are associated with fragments. We're also looking and planning to kind of revamp our self-book product. So again, allowing you to have more configurability and customization over the self-book product and your booking links, really kind of converging the experience you see in individual self-book with batch self-book. And then finally, creating our version of a cohort management tool. So making it kind of easier for practices to do recall and long-term care management, and giving you a much more holistic view of your responses to things like batch messages, batch questionnaires, and batch self-book links. But we've tried to kind of, I guess, cohort our product roadmap into 3 core areas. So as always, everything we build is really to help increase access and help with capacity. But we've tried to put it into these 3 pillars to make it easier to understand what our focus is and why we're focusing on these for 2025. So the first core area is advancing care navigation and triage efficiency. So that's a piece I touched on in the last slide around ensuring patients are getting the right care first time, but also supporting practices to manage the demand that does come into their practice much more easily and effectively. The second piece being the core management tool, so bringing in new features to help practices manage recall and long-term condition management. And then thirdly, joining up healthcare with this kind of single NHS-wide communication platform so that everyone involved in a patient's care can communicate and collaborate with each other. So lots of really exciting plans for 2025, but if you look at these 3 pillars, the first one is basically stepping up our online consultation offering. So we have smarter care navigation. The second one is improving our batch messaging functionality so we can enable cohort management. And the third one is enhancing things like our directory and our AccuMail features so that we can solve that problem at the kind of primary and secondary care interface. So if I dive into that first pillar in a little bit more detail, this is that piece around essentially trying to get better kind of signposting and care navigation into the system. So if we split it up in 2 halves, it's firstly empowering patients when they're making the requests so they have greater choice. And the second is then for the requests that do filter into practice, how can we make it easier to action and triage those requests with kind of assistive features. So the first half is around that signposting and simpler kind of care navigation. So this is, if you imagine right now when a patient goes to access their GP and the practice is using AccuRx as their online consultation tool, they're met with our kind of simple 4 to 6 question form, which is free text. And we have built that form because it is quite simple and it's accessible by a large kind of diverse demographic of patients. But we do know that quite often we get feedback that maybe practices aren't quite getting enough information up front. And whilst we've designed it with patients at the heart to kind of ensure that they can go through that whole flow and they're not dropping off, they're not kind of coming back to the phone lines, we do completely appreciate that there's instances where it'd be more beneficial to have more information up front. But akin to that also, there's lots of requests that actually shouldn't be falling to the GP practice in the first place and could be better signposted and kind of nudging the patients elsewhere in the first instance. So what we want to do is give patients really relevant and appropriate options when they submit their online requests and signposting them to services in a really safe, appropriate and context-driven way. So the first half of this year, we'll be looking at building that with national signposting services, so things like pharmacies and NHS UK. The second half of the year, we'll be really focusing into kind of more local borough or ICB specific pathways, such as kind of local physio self-referrals or MSK, etc. What that would look like in terms of like a patient's experience is they would go to submit a request, and we want to create this kind of front door that's a step away from general practice, but creating this digital front door integrated with the NHS app. They go to submit a request, perhaps they say they have lower back pain, they're then given the option of the Get You Better app or NHS UK for advice, or even kind of seeing a local physio self-referral pathway that's available in that region, but also giving context that helps nudge them to the most appropriate way. So whether that's showing wait times, you could be seen by the physio in 2 days, or you could be seen in this walk-in clinic within 2 weeks, etc. But we do appreciate that when you kind of give hard cutoffs, for example, saying that they can't contact their GP, that just tends to increase inbound call volume. So always allowing the patient to still contact their GP if desired. But this is where that second piece comes in. For those requests that do filter through to the practice, we're trying to gather more information upfront in a really kind of nuanced and context-driven way. So what we don't want to do is bombard every patient with every question possible, because we know that leads to kind of high drop-off rates. But what we can do is look at the information they give within the patient triage form and use machine learning to pull through questions that are relevant to the issue. So for example, they have lower back pain, they give us information in the kind of 4 to 6 questions, and we can see that actually in most instances it's really helpful to pull through the questions from the lower back pain questionnaire. That then means all the information lands in the healthcare professional's inbox and is then can help kind of support their triage decision off the back of that. But we've done it in a kind of context-driven way rather than asking every patient every question. And you can see an example of what that might look like, for example, if the patient submitted they had a UTI on the screen there. But the second half of that piece is thinking about, for the requests that do fall into the practice, actually what can we do within our inbox, within our tools, to make it easier to kind of take that first action or make it easier to triage that request. So some of the things we are looking to bring in 2025 is customizing your teams and folders, as I mentioned, so you're better able to kind of sort your requests in a way that suits your practice, whether you have a big MDT team or a practice with multiple sites, or you're just a very busy practice that needs to sort your requests in a really granular way. But also giving conversation controls. This is things like being able to add tags or labels so you can prioritize and sort and filter based on those tags and labels. It might be that you have tags kind of based on urgency, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or AM and PM, kind of being able to customize that directly how it works best for your practice. But also bringing in conversation statuses, so being able to snooze, mute, and continue to mark as done. But also we're trying to bring in kind of more AI into our products, so thinking about things like smart suggestion. So this would be suggesting common follow-up actions to respond to your inbound request to really help triaging teams or care navigators respond more efficiently to those standard requests. So again, maybe I say I have a sore throat and we can see off all the sore throat inbound requests, the most common next step was to send this template or send this questionnaire or send this attachment. And we can kind of prompt the user to send those if helpful. Also bringing in smart conversation threads. So this would be for any inbound request, being able to pull relevant threads that have already been brought into the practice in previous history. So trying to give all the context up front and really helping with that continuity of care piece. Smart summarization, so being able to show like at a high level what that request is about. So again, kind of making it easier to understand and prioritize and kind of action that request. And also more granular things in terms of being able to create an out of office. So that would be enabling to automatically reassign anything that's tried to sign into your inbox if you're off on leave or if you're off sick, for example. So reducing the need for manual reassignment, but also preventing anything kind of slipping through the cracks. So this kind of first pillar is really about how can we create an online consultation tool that signposts patients in a safe and appropriate way? How can we gather more information up front when it's needed? And then for any request that falls into the inbox, how can we create tools to make it easier for you to manage those requests and action them as needed? The second pillar is then around kind of enabling proactive care. So this is where we're looking to improve and enhance our batch messaging functionality to introduce our take on cohort management. So allowing healthcare teams to start, manage, and review patient communications at scale. There's 3 main ways we want to do that. So the first of them is creating kind of a batch messaging dashboard so you can see your responses at a glance. The second of them is creating automated workflows to kind of take the admin out of cohort management. And the third one is powering it by improving like our booking configurability. So really improving our booking product, which is at the heart of a lot of cohort management. So that first piece around messaging dashboards for batch messages, something that we're working on in 2025. It's kind of our big vision, for 2025 and beyond. But there's 4 key areas that we want to improve our product to allow this to happen. So firstly was that convergence work I talked about earlier. Secondly, we'll be kind of refreshing and updating our directory. Some of you might have used our directory when using AccuRx, and it is really helpful. There's lots of information in there around services that are close to you and contact details, but actually there's much richer information we can include in there in terms of when were they last active, or who are their kind of known colleagues within that department, or is there a phone number we can include as well as an email? So really revamping that directory to make it much easier to get to communicate and get guidance from other care settings. Third piece to support this is workspaces, which isn't as relevant to GP, but is really relevant to allowing pharmacies to speak to pharmacies and acutes to speak to acutes.